Q&A. Let me first turn to Dr. Fraser CcA, who joins us from the EU Asia Centre, where he is the director, and we have the pleasure of welcoming him back, I think. He was at YRFP before, when he was the head of the EU Russia Centre, I think is correct. But we'll turn to him now to give maybe a more general perspective as to why Asia, and more especially Asian trade, matters to the EU. So I'd like you to welcome him.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be back. And as someone who's just started a very young think tank, it's great to see so many young people interested in EU-Asia affairs. It's great for the future. It's always difficult trying to explain what the European Union is to audiences. I spent many years in the European Commission trying to do that. I remember when I was in Washington, just about 10 years ago now, I was flying down to Texas to meet the transition team of George W. Bush, and sitting beside me on the plane was a hotshot trade lawyer from Texas who told me how wonderful Texas was and how wonderful George W. was and how wonderful his company was. It turned out he worked for a small company called Exxon, remember? But after 20 minutes of his company and George W. in Texas, he turned to me and said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I work for the European Union." And there was a pause, and then he said, "Oh, is that some kind of insurance company?" I said, "Yes, it's a pretty big insurance company, and we're going up from 15 to 27 members shortly," so he was quite impressed about that. But this metaphor of the European Union as an insurance company is actually a pretty good one if you think about it. That's why we started this enterprise 50 years ago, and that's why it's still important today. We are an insurance company for countries in trouble, including Greece and Italy. And therefore, the metaphor of this insurance company is one I want you to remember. It's also important in dealing, I think, with Asian relations. Why is Asia important to us? I refer you to the most recent report, which is a video clip is on our website, so you can actually watch it on YouTube in 3 minutes. But it's the Asian Development Bank, and it's called Asia 2050. And it shows that if things go as they are, and we all know that there can be ups and downs, but if things go as they are, by 2050, Asia is going to be responsible for half of global trade, half of global GDP output, and half of global investment. Now that's the reason why Europe has to take an interest in Asia. Now, there are many areas of common concern that we have to work together, because this report talks about issues of global governance, it talks about standards, climate change, etc. So there is a big agenda out there in terms of the political issues that Noria and the ambassador of Korea mentioned in terms of how we should be working together. Now on the trade front, 10 years ago there was about a dozen bilateral trade agreements in Asia. Today there's over 60 and another 70 in the pipeline. Asia is where the action is in terms of trade. And the real question for the EU is, are we going to play in this game? Is the window going to be closing on what may be a completely new trade setup? Now, a few years ago, we agreed, when Peter Mandelson was the Trade Commissioner, that maybe Doha was not going to make it. And so we changed track and concentrated on some of the key Asian economies, particularly Korea with the FTA, but we're also negotiating now with India, Indonesia. Why did we not make it with ASEAN? Because ASEAN was simply so diverse, and so we picked off some of the more dynamic economies in ASEAN. So we're coming late to the game, but that doesn't mean that we are out of the game. But what it requires is a change of mindset, and what Christian Ellis said is absolutely true. We have to recognize the need for the EU institutions and everyone around it to take a greater interest in Asia. This means learning more languages. This means understanding where Asia is coming from and trying to get into the mindset of Asians, rather than, as we normally do, go and preach about how the EU is ready to bring things. I reviewed a few years ago the one and only EU strategy towards Asia, communication of 2001, and looked at it 10 years on. And the biggest critique from everyone I talked to, including many of our allies like Australia, was stop preaching. Stop telling the rest of Asia how good the EU is and how you must follow in their footsteps. Try and think of it as a partnership. And I think that is the important thing. Try and think of the EU-Asia future relationship as one of partnership, where the Asians can perhaps teach the EU a few things. Because what's happening at the moment? Klaus Regling is off to Beijing with his begging bowl. Can you spare a few RMB for us, please? I mean, how shameful is that? I mean, Europe should be able to actually deal with its own crisis. So let me pose a few questions for you. What's going to be the implications of this crisis now for EU-Asia relations, and particularly trade? Are we going to finally recognize the importance of Asia and do something about it and build on the agreements that we still are missing? Question number one. Can we actually get away from the fixation on China? Of course China is important, but why is it that in the last couple of years, more commissioners visited China than all other Asian countries together? To me, that is quite scandalous. So we have to pay more attention to Korea, to Japan, to Indonesia, etc. The focus in China is simply too one-sided. Thirdly, the implication of the spaghetti ball of FTAs now. What does this mean for the whole multilateral approach? Do we say it's completely dead? Do we continue it? Do we still try and see if the traditional big powers on the trade front, i.e. the United States, the Europeans, Japanese, India, Brazil can drive this forward? Or do we try and say, look, we have to have a new framework, recognize the importance of the BRICS, recognize the importance of the South overall, and see if we can actually move the spaghetti bowl into something more manageable in terms of eating, but preserving the multilateral framework, because that is important. And finally, and here I want to take issue with Norio. It's all very well, these declarations, but we have to have some substance behind them. If I look at Ashton Gemba's statement last week, surely discussed a number of nice foreign policy issues, but this is over 6 months after the summit between EU and Japan, when we agreed to start moving forward on the economic framework agreement. And so far, I would say we're simply not showing the haste that we need to develop this agreement here. And one of the reasons, and here's the provocative remark, is because throughout most of the EU institutions, there's suspicions that Japan doesn't want to do it. That Japan does not want to open up, that Japan is still too protectionist, given the problems with domestic constituencies, not only the farmers, but others as well, and therefore there's a reticence on the EU side to move forward. So it takes two to tango. And therefore, if we are going to move forward, we need to have an open dialogue about these issues. And this is why forums like this are so important. And this is why I welcome the opportunity to have this discussion. And I'm sure all my fellow panelists are now looking forward to your Q&A. Thank you very much.